Peat comes from unique and precious ecosystems. Sustainable and responsible management of peatlands is essential. Canada has 119 million hectares of peatlands. This represents 25% of all the peatlands in the world. The area in which the industry has carried out operations represents only 0.03% of all Canadian peatlands. Of this area, 60% is currently in production, 30% has been restored or rehabilitated, and 10% is awaiting restoration. In Canada, peat extraction activities are subject to strict provincial regulations to ensure that the resource and ecosystems are managed in a sustainable and responsible manner. The process begins with obtaining environmental, social, and economic authorizations from the provincial authorities. This step can take from 3 to 10 years. The peat is then harvested for 20 to 40 years on the same site. The peat is extracted using vacuum harvesters, which remove a very thin layer of peat with each pass. 5 to 10 centimeters of peat is extracted from the sites each year. The peat is then sieved and processed before being added to other ingredients to produce growing media. When the thickness of peat remaining on the site gets to 50 centimeters, or when the quality of the peat is no longer compatible with horticultural use, extraction ceases. The process then ends with the ecological restoration of the site to ensure the return of the ecosystem's ecological functions, including carbon sequestration and biodiversity. Since 1995, more than 9,500 hectares of post-extraction peatlands have been restored or rehabilitated by the peat industry. The Canadian Sphagnum Peat Moss Association and its members set themselves ambitious targets for reducing the areas historically closed without restoration. The objectives are to reduce these areas by 30% in the first 5 years and by 100% after 15 years. The first objective has been successfully achieved, with 37% of historic areas having been restored between 2016 and 2021. Since 2010, the horticultural peat industry has relied on the independent Veriflora certification program for the responsible management of horticultural peat. More than 80% of Canadian horticultural peat production is certified. The Veriflora standard certifies that peat production complies with environmental standards and enhances the well-being of workers and neighboring communities. Certified companies undergo an annual audit to ensure compliance with the standards. Restoring peatlands after harvesting is an important part of the certification process. In all its management practices, the Canadian horticultural peat industry relies on scientific knowledge. The industry supports academic research on peatland restoration and biodiversity, hydrology, and a number of topics relating to greenhouse gases and the impact of industry practices and peat use on carbon emissions. This research is essential to the development of truly sustainable and responsible management practices.